All right, so get this. You guys sent, in this case, the flat tire murders, and wow, just reading about it is already wild.
Yeah, it's a crazy one for sure. It kept Florida on edge for a couple years back in the 70s.
The 70s, huh? That's like prime time for serial killers, right?
Seems like it. I mean, think about it. You have Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, the Zodiac Killer, all operating around that
Like a
time.
who's who of American horror stories. But this one, the flat tire murders, it stayed unsolved for decades.
And then just when it seemed like it'd be forever cold, a DNA breakthrough in 2023.
And that's where it gets even more interesting, right? Because they finally had a name suspect, but
But he was already dead. Couldn't even bring him to trial.
Robert Keebler, that was his name, right?
Yep, Robert Clark Keebler. And on top of that, there's a good chance he wasn't working alone.
Okay, see, now that's what I'm talking about. That's why we're here, right?
Right.
To dig into all this stuff, you guys sent in news reports, articles, even some personal notes, it looks like.
All of that, yeah.
hmm
Trying to see what really went down.
So let's paint a picture for everyone. 1970s Florida. What was the vibe like back then?
Well, Florida in the 70s was beaming. Like a lot of places were growing fast,
hmm
people moving in cities getting bigger.
So a mix of like optimism and opportunity, but also maybe a sense of things changing too fast, you know?
Exactly. And it's right in the middle of all that these murders start happening. Young women turning up dead, a lot of them in or near canals.
And these weren't just random attacks, right? This guy had an MO.
Oh, yeah, very methodical.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it even creepier because the killer is described as this young white guy, early 20s, charming, well-dressed, athletic.
So not some creepy loner lurking in the shadows. He was blending right in.
Exactly. And his MO was basically he'd approach women, often pretending to help with a flat tire.
So playing the Good Samaritan, preying on their vulnerability.
Exactly. And then he'd overpower them and attack.
It's like he was using his charm and intelligence as weapons. That's just disturbing.
It really is. It makes you wonder if he was intentionally playing this role to get close to his victims.
To lull them into a false sense of security, that's terrifying. You know, and the stuff you sent there was mentioned that he might have been a sadist. Is there any more info on that?
Not really in what you gave me, but it is interesting to note that a lot of the victims looked alike, like he had a type.
Oh, wow. So maybe there was a fantasy element to it all, an obsession.
Could be. It's definitely something investigators would have considered.
Well, let's get into some specific cases then. One that really stands out is Judith Ann Osterling, 19 years old, disappears after work, and then her body turns up in a canal days later.
Yeah, her story is sadly similar to others like Barbara Davis Stevens. She told friends she was going to visit someone, then vanishes. Her car is found abandoned, and then her body turns up with multiple stab wounds.
Sounds like the same MO. And then there's Barbara Schreiber and Belinda Zetterer, two 14-year-old friends.
Disappeared one night, and they were found the next morning side by side, shot to death. Just awful.
It's heartbreaking to even think about what those families went through. And it's interesting that he seemed to be targeting women of a certain age range and appearance.
Right? That consistency in his MO really points to a pattern of calculated brutality. But there is one case that kind of breaks the mold. Robin Losh, another 14-year-old, found dead in a canal.
Yeah, this is the one where it wasn't clear if it was even a murder, right?
Exactly. She was fully clothed, cause of death was drowning, and there weren't any obvious signs of foul play like in the other cases.
So was this just a tragic accident, or was it Keebler using a different approach?
It's a good question, right? Does it fit the pattern or not? It's one of those details that would have kept investigators up at night.
So we've got this picture forming, right? This charming predator using his looks and smarts to mask something truly evil. And then decades go by and boom, the case takes this huge turn.
Yeah, in 2023, when the Broward County Sheriff's Office announces they got a DNA hit.
And after all these years, they finally have a name, Robert Clark Keebler, but
But as we said, he's already dead. Died in 2019.
talk about a twist. It's like the answer was right there, but just out of reach.
And remember those notes you mentioned about a possible accomplice?
Yeah, that's where this whole thing gets even more interesting, because now it's not just about Keebler himself. It's like, who else was involved? What did they do?
And were there maybe even more victims out there that we don't know about yet? It really opens up a whole new can of worms.
So we've got Robert Keebler, the charming predator, possibly working with someone else, terrorizing Florida in the 70s. But before we get into the whole accomplice thing, I got to know more about Keebler himself. What was his deal? Was there anything in his past that hinted at this darkness?
That's the crazy part. From what you gave me, there's not much info about Keebler's life before his DNA popped up in this case.
Oh, man, that's so frustrating. It's like having a book with a whole chapter ripped out.
Right. But I guess that's part of what makes this so intriguing.
Yeah.
You know, cold cases are tough. Memories fade, people move on, evidence gets lost. It's a real challenge to piece it all together.
But you got to hand it to the investigators. They never gave up on this case.
No, they didn't. And that DNA match must have been huge for them, even if it came too late to actually put Keebler on trial.
I bet it was a mix of relief and frustration, right? But at least it gave the victims' families some answers after all these years.
And it shows that even in cold cases, breakthroughs can happen. It gives hope to other families out there who are still waiting.
For sure. Okay, so let's get back to this accomplice then. What do we know about them? Who might they have been?
Unfortunately, the info is super limited. The sources mention the accomplice but don't give any specifics. It's a huge question mark.
Ugh, that's such a tease. It's like they're waving this juicy clue in front of us, but not letting us see it.
It's true. But even not knowing is important. You know, it means there are more questions to ask, more avenues to explore.
So let's put our detective hats on for a second. What are some possibilities here? Who might this accomplice have been based on what we know about Keebler?
Well, they could have been someone close to him. Someone who knew his dark side, maybe even shared his twisted desires.
Or maybe someone he manipulated or forced into helping him?
That's definitely possible. They could have been the muscle helping to subdue victims or dispose of bodies. Or maybe even helping to lure them in with a whole flat tire routine.
It's a chilling thought. Someone else out there may be living a normal life while carrying this secret.
Cases like this have a ripple effect, you know? The
Yeah.
trauma, the unanswered questions, the fear, it all goes way beyond just the victims themselves.
It's about the whole community trying to heal and find a sense of safety again.
Exactly. And the flat tire murders weren't just isolated events. They were part of this bigger pattern of violence that really left a mark on Florida.
Okay, so before we go full on accomplice deep dive, is there anything else in what you've read that we should be paying attention to? Any other details that might be important?
You know, it's interesting that so many of the victims looked similar. Like Keebler had a very specific type.
We talked about that a little bit. But yeah, it definitely seems like there was a fantasy element to all of this.
Right. And the fact that he was so methodical about everything points to a really disturbing level of planning.
It's like he wasn't just snapping. He was choosing his victims carefully and then executing his plan with precision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more important to try and understand who this accomplice might have been. How did they fit into all of this?
Oh, and I almost forgot about this too. There's the whole thing about Keebler possibly being linked to murders in other states. Like,
Yep.
he might have started in California.
Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the sources you sent don't have much detail about those cases.
Really? So we don't even know for sure if those murders happened or if they're connected to Keebler.
That's the thing with cold cases. A lot of times it's about connecting the dots, even when some of the dots are missing.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got Robert Keebler linked by DNA to a string of murders in Florida, maybe even beyond. We know he had an MO, targeted specific types of women, and might have had help from someone else.
And we still don't know who that someone else was, what their role was, or even if Keebler was responsible for other murders outside of Florida.
It's like we've peeled back one layer of the onion, but there's a whole bunch more underneath.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. There's still so much to uncover.
It's like a puzzle with a bunch of missing pieces, but I'm already hooked. I want to see what else we can find out.
Me too.
Oh,
And you know what else I think is really important to explore in this case?
what's that?
The human side of it all. We can't forget about the victims, their families, the community that was terrorized by all of this.
You're absolutely right. Those are the stories that really hit home. What was it like for people living in Florida back then, knowing that this killer was out there?
It must have been terrifying. I can't even imagine.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about the impact of these crimes on the people who lived through them. It's hard to even imagine what those families went through, the not knowing, the waiting, and then to find out it was murder.
I know. It's just unimaginable. And to have to wait decades for answers like that, for some kind of closure?
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff you sent, it really shows how deeply this affected the whole community.
You mentioned fear and uncertainty. What was it actually like for people living in Florida back then, knowing there was a killer out there targeting young women?
Can you imagine living like that?
Yeah,
Always looking over your shoulder, wondering if you or someone you know could be next?
yeah.
The sources you gave me talk about this feeling of dread that just hung over everything.
Yeah, I bet people were scared to go out alone, especially at night. I'd be changing my routine for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Parents wouldn't let their daughters out. Friends wouldn't meet up after dark. Even just going to the store would be scary. That sense of safety to be completely shattered.
So how did people cope? I mean, how do you go on with your life with that kind of fear hanging over you? Did the sources mention anything about how the community responded to all this?
There wasn't much about specific community initiatives, but I'm sure people came together to try and feel safe again. Maybe they started neighborhood watch groups or shared information or just tried to support each other.
It's like even in the darkest times, people find ways to help each other, to find strength in community.
Exactly. And speaking of that, we got to talk about the investigators in this case. I mean, their dedication is incredible. To keep working on a case for decades, never giving up, that's amazing.
It shows how much they believed in getting justice for the victims, no matter how much time had passed. And in the end, it was their work that led to that DNA breakthrough, even though it was too late to actually put Keebler on trial.
And that breakthrough, it shows how far forensic science has come. The fact that they could use DNA to solve a case from the 70s. I mean, that technology didn't even exist back then. It's pretty incredible.
It definitely gives hope to other families who are still waiting for answers in cold cases. It shows that sometimes, even after decades, breakthroughs can happen.
It's like a light in the darkness, right? A sign that even when all hope seems lost, justice is still possible.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. We've got this story of tragedy and mystery, but also hope and the pursuit of justice. We've talked about the victims, their families, the chilling way Robert Keebler operated, the DNA evidence that finally pointed to him, and now the mystery of this possible accomplice.
And through all of that, what really stands out to me?
What's that?
How much we still don't know. We've uncovered a lot, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface.
That's what makes this whole thing so fascinating, right? It's not just about what we know, but also about what we don't know. It's about those gaps in the story, the questions that are still unanswered.
And for anyone who's into true crime, that's what keeps you coming back.
Yeah.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
So let's talk about those missing pieces. Where do we go from here? If we want to dig deeper into this case, what should we focus on?
For me, the biggest question is the accomplice. I mean, was there really someone else involved? And if so, who were they? What did they do? Were they in on it from the start, or did Keebler manipulate them into helping?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And like we said before, the sources you sent me are pretty vague on that point. They mention an accomplice, but don't give any real details.
Right. But you know what I'm thinking?
What?
Maybe law enforcement knows more than they're letting on. Maybe to protect an ongoing investigation or something.
Oh, that's a good point. So maybe our listener could do some digging on their own. Try to find information that hasn't been made public yet.
Exactly. They could check out old news archives, court records, maybe even online forums dedicated to true crime. You never know what you might find.
And what about those out-of-state murders? The ones that might be connected to Keebler.
That's another angle worth exploring. If those murders did happen, and if Keebler was involved, it means there could be more victims, more families out there who are still waiting for answers.
It's a scary thought, but it's also important to consider, right? It could mean this case is way bigger than we initially thought.
It's like this whole other layer of the mystery. And it brings up another question. What was Keebler's motive? I mean, what would drive someone to do something so horrific? Was it something he couldn't control? Was it like a fantasy he was trying to live out?
And will we ever know the answer to that? I mean, with Keebler gone, it's like a piece of the puzzle is missing forever.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
But it also shows how complicated human nature can be. Sometimes people do terrible things, and we never fully understand why.
True. Okay, so this deep dive has taken us deep into a dark chapter in Florida's history. We've looked at the details of the crimes, the man behind them, the impact on the victims and the community, the long search for justice, and the questions that still linger.
And what's really been interesting for me?
What's that?
Seeing how even in the face of something so awful, there's still hope.
Yeah.
There's the dedication of the investigators, the strength of the community, and the power of science to uncover the truth.
I totally agree. And even though Robert Keebler will never stand trial, the fact that he was identified, that his name is out there, that's got to bring some closure to the victims' families. And it's a reminder that even after all these years, justice is still possible.
It's like saying, hey, even though this terrible thing happened, we haven't forgotten. We're still searching for answers. We're still fighting for the truth.
So for our listeners out there who are hooked on this case like we are, what advice would you give them if they want to learn more?
I'd say start by digging into local news archives from the 70s. Look for any articles or reports about the flat tire murders. You might find details that haven't been talked about in a while, maybe even some personal stories from people who lived through it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And they could also check out online forums and databases about true crime. There might be other people who've researched this case and have some interesting insights.
Definitely. And if they really want to go deep, they could contact the Broward County Sheriff's Office, maybe even file a Freedom of Information Act request to see if there are any documents that haven't been released to the public.
Those are some good tips. And remember, even small details can be important. A name, a place, a date, anything could be a clue that helps solve the mystery.
You're right. Sometimes it's the little things that end up making a big difference. So yeah, if you're interested in this case, keep digging, keep asking questions. You never know what you might uncover.
This deep dive has been fascinating and honestly pretty disturbing, too. We've uncovered this really dark part of Florida's history, the story of a predator who terrorized a community for years, leaving behind pain, fear, and so many unanswered questions.
But we've also seen how strong people can be.
Yeah.
The way the community came together, the dedication of the investigators, and the fact that even after decades, the truth can still come out.
And while Robert Keebler may never face a judge or jury, at least his name is out there, his crimes are no longer a secret. And that's got to mean something.
It's like a victory for the victims and their families, even if it's a bittersweet one. It shows that evil doesn't always win. Even after all these years, the good guys can still catch a break.
So, to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. And this case may be officially closed, but there's still so much more to explore. The flat tire murders are like a puzzle with missing pieces, and it's up to all of us to keep searching for those pieces, to keep trying to understand what really happened.
Yeah, and you know what the best part is?
Just that.
We might never have all the answers. But that's okay. Sometimes the journey, the search for the truth, is just as important as the destination itself. So keep digging, keep exploring, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to finally crack this case wide open.
It's crazy to think that even now, with the DNA and everything, we still know so little about this case.
It's true, and I think that's what keeps people coming back to true crime. That desire to understand, to like piece together the puzzle and try to make sense of the senseless.
Totally. And in this case, it's those missing pieces that really get you thinking. We've got Robert Keebler, linked by the DNA, but he's gone, can't tell us anything. We've got the accomplice still out there somewhere, completely unknown. And then there are those possible murders in other states, adding another layer to it all.
It's like we're looking at this huge map with only a few points plotted. There are all these blank spaces, and we're trying to figure out what's there.
So where do we even start? Like, if we want to try and fill in those blank spaces, what should we focus on first?
Well, for me, the biggest question mark is the accomplice. Was there actually another person involved? And if so, who were they? What did they do? Were they a willing partner, or did Keebler manipulate them into helping him?
It's the mystery within the mystery, right?
Yeah.
And like we said before, the stuff you sent me is pretty thin on that point. They mentioned an accomplice, but that's about it.
But you know what I was thinking? Maybe law enforcement knows more than they're letting on.
Yeah.
Maybe to protect the investigation or something?
Oh, that's a good point. So
Yeah.
maybe there's info out there that just hasn't been made public yet.
Exactly. And maybe our listener can do some digging. Check out old news reports, court records, maybe even online forums dedicated to true crime. You never know what you might find.
And what about those out-of-state murders that Keebler might be connected to?
That's another path to follow, for sure.
Yeah.
If those murders happened and Keebler was involved, that means there could be families out there who are still waiting for answers.
And it would mean this whole thing is way bigger than we thought.
Exactly. It's like we're only seeing a small part of the picture right now. And then there's the question of motive. What made Keebler do this? Was there something specific that drove him? Was it like a compulsion or a fantasy?
It's questions like that that really make you think about the nature of evil, trying to understand what would make someone capable of something so horrific.
And sometimes you just can't find the answers, especially when the person responsible is gone.
Well, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We've gone from this mysterious string of murders to a DNA breakthrough to the possibility of an accomplice and maybe even more victims in other states.
And even though Robert Keebler is dead and can't be brought to trial, the fact that he's been identified means something.
Yeah.
It's a form of justice, even if it's not perfect.
And it shows that even in the darkest of cases, there's still hope.
Exactly. Hope for answers, hope for closure, and hope that maybe someday we'll be able to prevent something like this from happening again.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to say thank you to everyone who sent in their research and notes on this case. It's been a fascinating journey, and I think we've all learned a lot.
Me too. And you know what I think is really amazing about this case?
What's that?
Even though it's officially closed, it feels like there's still so much more to discover. It's like this story that's still being written.
And that's the beauty of true crime, right? It's about more than just the facts. It's about the search for the truth, the desire to understand, and the knowledge that even in the darkest corners of human experience, there's always something to learn.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So to all our listeners out there, keep those detective hats on, keep digging, and most importantly, never stop asking questions. Who knows what you might uncover?
Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.